Los Angeles Airport, April 1947. Cameras were rolling. Frank Sinatra saw journalist Lee Mortimer walking toward him, and something inside Frank snapped. The punch was caught on film, and the lawsuit came the next morning. Frank Sinatra was exhausted. It was late, past midnight, and he just finished performing at Ciro's Nightclub on the Sunset Strip. The show had gone well. The crowd had been enthusiastic. Frank should have been happy, but he wasn't, because for the past 6 months, one journalist had been making Frank's life miserable, and that journalist was Lee Mortimer. Lee Mortimer wrote for the New York Daily Mirror. He had a gossip column called Broadway After Dark, and he hated Frank Sinatra with a passion that bordered on obsessive. Every column was another attack, another insinuation, another accusation. Mortimer wrote that Frank had mob connections, that he was a communist sympathizer, that he was arrogant, temperamental, and bad for America. He called Frank's fans moronic and mindless. He suggested that Frank's success was manufactured, undeserved, suspicious. At first, Frank had tried to ignore it. His publicist had advised him, "Don't engage. Responding just gives him more attention. Let it go." But Mortimer didn't let it go. If anything, he got worse, more vicious, more personal. He started writing about Frank's marriage, about Nancy and the kids, suggesting Frank was a bad husband, a bad father, a bad role model. And Frank, who could handle criticism about his singing or his acting or even his personality, couldn't handle attacks on his family. That crossed a line. That made it personal. So on this particular night, April 8th, 1947, when Frank walked out of Ciro's nightclub with his entourage and saw Lee Mortimer standing near the exit, something inside him broke. Mortimer wasn't there to cover Frank's show. He was there for some other event. But when he saw Frank coming, he smirked. Actually smirked. Like he was enjoying Frank's discomfort. Like he knew exactly what his columns had been doing to Frank, and he was proud of it. Frank's bodyguard saw it first. "Boss, let's go the other way. Don't engage." But Frank was already walking toward Mortimer. Fast, purposeful, his hands clenched into fists. "Frank, don't," his publicist started to say. Too late. Frank reached Mortimer and grabbed him by the shoulder, spinning him around. "You son of a bitch. You've been writing lies about me for months, lies about my family, and you stand there smirking like it's a joke?" Mortimer's eyes widened. He wasn't smirking anymore. "Get your hands off me, Sinatra. I'll have you arrested for assault." "Assault? You haven't seen assault yet." Frank pulled back his fist and punched Lee Mortimer in the face. Hard. The kind of punch that came from months of pent-up rage and frustration and helplessness. Mortimer went down, hit the ground. Blood immediately started pouring from his nose, possibly broken. His glasses flew off and skittered across the pavement. Cameras flashed. Multiple cameras. Photographers had been outside Ciro's covering the various celebrities coming and going, and they'd just captured Frank Sinatra, America's favorite crooner, punching a journalist in the face. Frank stood over Mortimer, breathing hard, fists still clenched. For a moment he looked ready to hit him again. Then reality set in. What had he just done? He'd assaulted a member of the press, in public, with cameras rolling. This was going to be everywhere tomorrow. 3 men grabbed Frank and pulled him back. "We need to go, now, before the cops show up." They hustled Frank to his car and drove away, fast. Left Mortimer on the ground, bleeding, surrounded by photographers who were now documenting the aftermath of Frank Sinatra's very public, very violent loss of control. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Every newspaper, every radio broadcast. Sinatra punches journalist. The photos were damning. Frank's face contorted with rage, his fist connecting with Mortimer's jaw. Mortimer on the ground, blood, glasses broken. The whole ugly scene captured in black and white for the world to see. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Frank's fans were divided. Some defended him. Mortimer had it coming. He's been attacking Frank for months, but others were shocked. Violence is never the answer. Frank should have been the bigger man. The media, naturally, sided with Mortimer. A journalist had been assaulted by a celebrity. This was an attack on press freedom. Frank Sinatra was a thug, a bully, a danger to society. The studios panicked. Frank was under contract with MGM. He had movies in production, and now he was a liability, a PR nightmare. The studio heads called emergency meetings. How do we handle this? How do we salvage Frank's image? And then came the lawsuit. Lee Mortimer filed a $25,000 civil suit against Frank
Frank Sinatra for assault and battery. The case would go to court. There would be testimony, more publicity, more damage to Frank's reputation. Frank met with his lawyers. They were blunt. This looks bad, really bad. You assaulted a journalist in front of witnesses and cameras. He's injured. He's got medical bills. He's claiming emotional distress. You're going to lose this case. So what do? Settle. Apologize publicly. Pay him off. Make this go away as quickly as possible. But Frank Sinatra didn't apologize for anything. Not to anyone. Especially not to Lee Mortimer. He's been trashing me in print for 6 months. Every column another lie. Another attack on my family. And you want me to apologize to him? We want you to save your career. Because right now it's circling the drain. The studios are talking about canceling your contracts. Radio stations are pulling your songs. This punch could end everything you've built. Frank sat in silence for a long moment. The lawyer was right. The punch had been stupid, impulsive, self-destructive. But apologizing felt like admitting.
Mortimer was right. Like admitting Frank was everything Mortimer had accused him of being. What if I don't settle? What if I fight this in court? The lawyer shook his head. Then it drags out for months. More headlines, more bad publicity, and you still lose. The evidence is overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, photographs, Mortimer's injuries. You assaulted him, Frank. There's no disputing that. He provoked me. Provocation isn't a legal defense for assault. You can't punch someone because they wrote mean things about you. That's not how the law works. Frank knew it was true, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. Frank's agent called. His publicist called. Friends from the industry called. Everyone had the same message. Settle. Apologize. Make this go away. Nancy, Frank's wife, was the most direct. Frank, you have 3 children. We have a life, a home, security, and you're throwing it all away because of your pride. Lee Mortimer is a nobody, a gossip columnist, and you gave him exactly what he wanted. You proved he was right about you. He wasn't right about me. Then why did you punch him? If he was wrong, if he was lying, why didn't you sue him for libel? Why didn't you use the courts the proper way? Instead, you used your fists. And now everyone thinks you're exactly what he said you were. A thug with mob connections who solves problems with violence. Frank didn't have an answer for that, because Nancy was right. The punch had confirmed every negative thing Mortimer had written. Frank had played right into his hands. A week after the incident, Frank's lawyer negotiated a settlement. Frank would pay Lee Mortimer $9,000, significantly less than the $25,000 Mortimer had demanded, but still a substantial sum. And Frank would issue a public statement, but Frank refused to apologize. The statement his publicist drafted was carefully worded. I regret the incident at Ciro's nightclub. I should not have let my emotions get the better of me. I have compensated Mr. Mortimer for his injuries and consider this matter closed. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement, and it was the best Frank was willing to do. Mortimer accepted the settlement. He'd gotten his money and he'd gotten his revenge. Frank Sinatra's reputation had taken a massive hit. Mortimer had won, but the damage to Frank's career was only beginning. The studios didn't cancel his contracts outright, but they started to have doubts. Was Frank reliable? Was he stable? Could they trust him not to do something like this again? Radio stations were cautious about playing his music. Some banned it outright. Others played it less frequently. Frank's record sales dropped. Concert bookings became harder to secure. And the FBI, which had been keeping a casual eye on Frank due to his rumored mob connections, opened a formal file. The punch proved Frank was violent, unstable, someone worth investigating more closely. What Frank didn't know at the time was that Lee Mortimer had connections of his own. Mortimer was friendly with certain FBI officials. He'd been feeding them information about Frank for months. Rumors, innuendo, unverified accusations. And the punch gave the FBI justification to take those rumors seriously. Over the next few years, the FBI would investigate Frank's mob ties, his political affiliations, his business dealings. They'd tap his phones, follow him, interview his associates, and a significant portion of that investigation stemmed from one impulsive moment outside Ciro's nightclub when Frank let his anger control him. Months after the settlement, Frank was performing at a club in New York. The show went well. Afterward, a man approached him backstage. Mr. Sinatra, my name is William. I'm a reporter for the Times. Can I ask you a few questions? Frank's publicist immediately stepped forward. Mr. Sinatra isn't giving interviews tonight, but Frank waved him off. It's fine. What do you want to know? I'm doing
doing a piece on your altercation with Lee Mortimer. Do you regret hitting him? Frank thought about it. Really thought about it. Did he regret it? I regret the consequences. I regret what it did to my career and my reputation. I regret giving Mortimer exactly what he wanted. But do I regret defending myself against someone who'd been attacking me and my family for months? No, I don't regret that. So you'd do it again? I'd handle it differently. I'd be smarter. But Mortimer was a bully who used his column to destroy people, and eventually bullies get punched. That's just how the world works. The reporter wrote down every word. The next day, the article ran with the headline, "Sinatra, no regrets about punching journalist." And just like that, the whole controversy flared up again. Frank's publicist was furious. "Why did you say that? We'd finally put this behind us and you brought it all back up." "Because it's the truth. I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry when I'm not." "Frank, sometimes in this business you have to pretend. You have to play the game. You can't just say whatever you're thinking whenever you feel like it. Then maybe I'm in the wrong business." That attitude, Frank's absolute refusal to play by the rules, to apologize, to be anything other than exactly who he was, would define his entire career. Sometimes it hurt him. Often it hurt him. But it also made him who he was. Frank Sinatra, for better or worse, did things his way. Years later, in the early 1950s, when Frank's career had hit rock bottom, when his voice was failing, his marriage was over, his contracts were gone, he'd look back on the Mortimer punch as a turning point. Not because the punch itself was significant, but because of what it represented. It represented Frank's inability to control his impulses, his pride, his anger. And those qualities, while they made him charismatic and authentic, also made him self-destructive. When Frank made his comeback in
the mid-1950s with From Here to Eternity, he was a changed man. Not completely changed. He was still Frank Sinatra, still proud, still quick to anger. But he'd learned something from the dark years. He'd learned that some fights aren't worth fighting, that sometimes you have to swallow your pride for the bigger picture. But he never apologized to Lee Mortimer, never reached out, never made peace. In 1963, Lee Mortimer died of a heart attack. He was 55 years old. Frank was performing in Las Vegas when he heard the news. Someone asked him if he wanted to make a statement. About what? About Mortimer. He died today. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry he's dead. Nobody should die that young. But I'm not going to pretend we were friends or that I respected him. He made his living tearing people down, and he was damn good at it. That's all I have to say. It wasn't generous. It wasn't kind. But it was honest. And that was about as close to grace as Frank Sinatra was capable of when it came to Lee Mortimer. In Frank's FBI file, which wouldn't be declassified until decades after his death, there were dozens of references to the Mortimer punch. The FBI used it as evidence of Frank's violent tendencies, his mob mentality, his unsuitability for certain honors and positions. When Frank was considered for a presidential appointment in the 1970s, the FBI file was reviewed, and the Mortimer punch was cited as a reason to deny him. One moment of lost control, captured on camera in 1947, followed Frank Sinatra for the rest of his life. Frank's daughter Nancy once asked him about it. "Dad, if you could go back, would you still punch him?" Frank smiled. "Yeah, probably. I'm not good at learning lessons, baby. Never have been. But it cost you so much. Your reputation, career opportunities, the FBI file." "It did. But you know what? Mortimer got punched. And every time I remember that, I feel a little satisfaction. Is that petty? Absolutely. Do I care? Not really." Nancy laughed. "You're impossible. That's why people love me." The truth was more complicated than Frank's bravado suggested. The Mortimer punch haunted him, not because he regretted the punch itself, but because of what it revealed about him. It revealed that Frank Sinatra, for all his talent and charm and success, couldn't always control himself, couldn't always be strategic, couldn't always think beyond the immediate moment. And in Hollywood, where image was everything, where perception was reality, where one mistake could end a career, that lack of control was dangerous, potentially fatal. Frank survived it, barely. His talent was too enormous to be destroyed by one incident, his charisma too powerful, his voice too perfect. But lesser performers with lesser gifts might not have survived what Frank survived. In his final years, when Frank was in his 70s and looking back on his life, he gave an interview to a journalist. The journalist asked about regret. "Everyone has regrets, Mr. Sinatra. What are yours?" Frank thought for a long time. Then he said, "I regret the people I hurt. My first wife, Nancy, my kids, people who loved me and got caught in the crossfire of my ego and my temper. As for professional regrets, the Mortimer punch is probably at the top of the list. Because of the consequences, because it was stupid. It was exactly what he wanted me to do. He'd been baiting me for months, and I finally took the bait, and I gave him the greatest gift a gossip columnist could ask for. Proof that he was right about me." "Was he right about you?" Frank smiled. "In some ways, yeah. I did have mob connections. I was temperamental. I solved problems with my fists sometimes when I should have used my brain. So yeah, Mortimer wasn't wrong. He was an asshole, but he wasn't wrong. Do you think you'd be different if you could do it over?" "No, because being different would mean being someone I'm not, and I'd rather be Frank Sinatra with all my flaws than some sanitized, committee-approved version of myself." The Mortimer punch was peak Frank Sinatra. Impulsive, self-destructive, honest, and completely unable to back down even when backing down was the smart play. The journalist wrote it all down, and when the interview was published, the headline was, "Sinatra on Mortimer. I was stupid, but I'd do it again," because that was Frank. Contradictory, self-aware enough to recognize his mistakes, but too stubborn to actually change. It made him frustrating, difficult, impossible to work with sometimes, but it also made him legendary. The Mortimer punch became part of the Sinatra mythology, a story people told to illustrate what Frank was really like, not the polished image he presented on stage, not the smooth crooner in the tuxedo, but the real Frank, volatile, loyal, dangerous, human. Decades after it happened, the photographs from that night remained iconic. Frank's face contorted with rage, Mortimer on the ground, the violence captured in stark black and white. They were reproduced in biographies, documentaries, museum exhibits about Frank's life, and every time someone saw those photos, they thought the same thing. That's Frank Sinatra, not the romantic ballad singer, not the movie star, but the guy who'd punch you in the face if you pushed him too far. Was it good for his image? No. Was it smart? Absolutely not. Did it cost him opportunities and damage his reputation? Without question. But it was real. It was authentic. It was Frank refusing to be anything other than exactly who he was. And in the end, that authenticity, that refusal to be anyone other than Frank Sinatra, consequences be damned, was what made him immortal. Los Angeles Airport, April 1947. Cameras were rolling. Frank Sinatra saw journalist Lee Mortimer walking toward him, and something inside Frank snapped. The punch was caught on film, and the lawsuit came the next morning. That punch lasted less than a second, but its consequences lasted a lifetime. And Frank Sinatra, despite everything it cost him, never truly regretted it. Because being Frank meant refusing to be pushed around, refusing to take abuse quietly, refusing to be anything other than exactly who he was, even when who he was got him in trouble, especially when who he was got him in trouble. Because that's what it meant to be Frank Sinatra, to do it his way, no matter what.